it seems to me the place to begin is by asking the question, now, why is this organization struggling? I mean, what's the problem? What's happening to cause this? Because that's really where you have to begin. Often you see an organization struggling, you want to pitch in and make things happen, but it's much better to stop and analyze and ask why. You're familiar with the statement, ready, fire, aim. Sometimes people do that, and it isn't unusual in organizations to do that. Instead of ready, aim, fire, it's ready, fire, aim. So we say, you got to figure out, why is this happening? What's going on? And typically, various reasons could cause an organization to struggle. In fact, there could be a combination of factors. It may not be one thing, it may be multiple factors together that are causing the problem. So what you want to do is carefully analyze what's happening to determine the cause. Once you can determine cause or causes, then you can begin to make some progress. But if you don't know what's the matter, then you can't solve the problem. So to me, it's that basic. You have to know the root of the problem, or you're not likely to find a solution. If you do, it's going to be an accident. It won't be because you knew what you were doing. You may have seen things where something goes wrong with the machine, and your immediate answer is to hit it or kick it and try to make it right. Sometimes that's what happens with an organization. You do that sort of thing instead of carefully investigating or analyzing to see where you are. Now, one of the easiest ways to go at this is what's called a SWOT analysis, S-W-O-T. Are any of you familiar with SWOT analysis? Oh, you all are familiar with it. You can go to another seminar. We're in good shape. Well, let me run through it quick, and then we can come back to some other things. I think it's maybe one of the best ways to begin to analyze an organization, get a plan to go forward. Typically, as you know, it involves attempting to discern the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats or competition that the organization experiences. Now, what about identifying strengths? As you do that, you say, well, identifying the strengths will help reveal the base from which we build the future, because you need to operate from your strength, not from your weakness. Operate from your strength. You may know Peter Drucker encourages that. He was a great management guru. He said, you concentrate on your strength, get it more, and let the weakness fade into oblivion. So, what are the strengths that you have that are needed to face the future successfully, given your mission? And all of those elements are important. It's given your mission, what strengths are there that will let you face the future successfully, and you got to get those three in combination. And you can ask yourself, now, so far, what's been the key to our success? What has been our greatest strength? What's been our biggest help making progress? And then you can begin to ask things like, if we can identify our strength, we know the things we're best at, then how do we maximize those to address the opportunities we have so that we get the best match between our strength and the opportunity that's out there? The next thing you want to do is identify your weaknesses. We're to the W of the SWOT. And weaknesses typically reveal areas that have to be improved for a better future. You cannot ignore them, because if you do, they could sink you, and you don't want them to do that. So you have to see what they are, see if there are ways you can address them. What weaknesses are holding your organization back and causing struggles? Has your performance been unsatisfactory? Is there a leadership vacuum? Are some employees a handicap? It could be any number of things like that. What about the opportunities you have? Are there opportunities that you may not have identified or exploited in order to build a healthier future? Sometimes that can be the case. And if so, how can you take advantage of those? That's a very important question. Often there are more opportunities than you realize. That's been my experience. There are often far more opportunities than you ever begin to realize or acknowledge. And one of the biggest challenges is to be able to identify or to discern what those opportunities are and how to get a match between your strengths and those opportunities. You can ask yourself, now, is there a key audience that we are ignoring? Is there something like that that could make a difference? Is there new technology available that would help? Is there a donor ready to make a huge gift? I'll give you a couple of examples with these. A key audience. I worked at a theological school for many years. And we were a small school and we wanted to be a little bigger, more influential school. And we struggled to attract students. And then we began to look at some things differently. For example, we discovered that campus ministers were at universities or other schools most of the year, not in the summer, and sometimes not in a winter break. And so we asked, can we design a program where we do intensive courses during a short winter period and during the summer so these people can come to our school? And then we discovered there were some people who were working or lived at a distance and they couldn't leave all week. But if we could do some coursework on one day in block classes, 3 hours at a time or so, some of those people could come. If we did some in the evening, some business people could come who wouldn't come otherwise. And every time we did something different, we found there was a whole new group of people that could become students. And we'd never thought of that. And so the next thing that occurred, we had students we had never even considered looking at our school. Another thing we did is we developed small programs in other locations. And as we did those programs in other locations, we again attracted students that never would have looked at us otherwise. So we had that. Then you say new technology. We discovered that with all the technological change that was occurring, one of the things that made possible was videoing courses. So as we're doing a video of the presentations here at Greater European Leadership Forum, the thing we found in a theological school is we could do the classes and then we could make those classes available to people at a distance. And we could have people who worked online to instruct and to help them. And then you had a new group of students. There were always opportunities out there. Our problem is we had never considered some of those before. But once we did, it began to change things dramatically. And so the school went from 200 to 2,600, which is large for a theological school. Or then you say, maybe there's a donor who can make a large gift that would make a significant difference. Because typically you don't get many large gifts. And our experience was, if we had a $25,000 gift, we would celebrate. That was wonderful. But then we began to do some research, and we started investigating all the people that were giving money to the school, and then we started networking their friends. And we began to get bigger gifts, and then we discovered other people. And as they saw the things that were happening, we began to get bigger gifts. And eventually, we had, I think the biggest single gift was $20 million. But we had a $15 million gift, $20 million, some $5 million gifts. And at one point in my work, if it wasn't at least $250,000, I didn't have time to work with it. Now that's going from $25,000 is wonderful to a very significant world. And my point is, not that we did it, but it's that these things are possible for most schools. It's possible to grow not only your enrollment, but it's possible to grow your contributions significantly if you see the opportunities and learn how to maximize those. Most of the time, we're so accustomed to doing things the way they've been done and to seeing things in a small framework that we miss some of these big opportunities. And then you have to identify the threats that are out there. So what are the visible threats to the organization? Perhaps some of them causing your current struggles. Is competition from similar ministries the issue? So, for example, as a theological school, one of the things we had to think about was what other theological schools might a student choose to attend? And why might they choose to attend them? Better faculty, better location, better reputation, whatever. There could be all kinds of factors. So you had to know what the competition was, what degree of difficulty it caused for you, and then have a plan to deal with that. And that plan involved knowing clearly what your possible market was, being able to identify that, being able to segment that over against, say, a competitor or an alternative school that might be very attractive. So that would be one kind of thing. Competition can be of other types as well. Competition or a threat can be the place where you're located. There's some schools that are located in such bad areas, say for example, a dangerous area in a city, that it creates a problem for them. And so they have to worry about safety, they have to worry about security, that's a factor you've got to deal with. And you can think of any number of other things that are somewhat like that. So you say, we have to identify all of these. And it's possible that we've lived with some of them so long we don't see them. So we need to think clearly, what is it that may be holding us back? What may be competition or threat out there that we might not even be aware of? Then you say, what are the typical causes of weakness? I'd say there are 4 categories. You can probably do 6, 7, or 8 easy. But let's take these. One is financial. And so you say, well, if we only had more money, then we could do this, and then we could do that. And you really forge ahead, but we don't have the money. And so it's a weakness. People just don't give to us. I talked to a school once some years ago, and they said, well, we just don't have any people who are capable of giving big gifts in our constituency or support group. Now, they really believed that. Later on, some years later, they discovered that had been completely erroneous. They had people who could give millions of dollars, and they didn't even know it and pay attention to them. So sometimes there can be something like that. You should know, but you don't know. So there can be the financial, then leadership can be another cause of weakness. Leadership that is lacking vision, leadership that's unwilling to make decisions, leadership that doesn't build team and cohesiveness, or whatever it may be. There are all kinds of other factors in there too. Can be bored, Sometimes a very weak board, or a board in which there's conflict, a board that doesn't have the capability to take you where you need to go, that can be a big weakness. There was a group that advised organizations on how to move their organization forward. And one of the problems they always pointed to was the board. And they said, you know, you think of your institution, could be a missions organization, it could be a theological school, it could be something else. They said, think of it like a train. And the board is the engine. And if the engine isn't strong enough, it won't get up that hill. It may try, but it won't get up that hill. So you have to have a board that's strong enough, cohesive enough, knowledgeable and committed enough to take you forward. And another area of weakness can be staff. And it can be that you don't have the people who are capable of doing what needs to be done. Could be that you have people who are not happy and not really working as cooperatively or as hard as they should to advance the organization, which is not unusual. It's hard to maximize the talent in your organization. So you ask yourself, do we have weaknesses in any of these areas? And then you look to address those. Say, for example, the financial. Is there financial distress? And if so, of what nature is it? Well, typically you look at your expenses and income pretty carefully and you ask yourself, are we controlling expenses? For example, do you need all the personnel, equipment, and travel that you spend money for? Sometimes organizations have budgets and they spend money because it's in the budget, not because they really need to spend it. And so you should be asking yourself, are we being very careful to make our money count? If we don't need to spend it, we don't spend it. Then we have it for something important. It's like investing. If you have a little money, you've got to place it very carefully. And you have to keep watching it so that it performs well. You can grow it into a lot of money. But if you don't do it, you can end up with no money. And we all know that. There are fascinating stories of that. Where could you save money on expenses? That's related to the first. What if you eliminate some personnel? I just consulted with an organization in the States recently, a very well-known old organization, and has done many good things, but they have a significant financial deficit every year that they have to find a way to cover, either by spending reserve funds or getting somebody unusual to put a big gift in. And they realize God has been good to them, but they cannot expect that to happen. So what do? Well, we looked at the organization carefully and determined, here are some things you can do to create more income, to create more gifts, but for the size of your organization, you have too many people. And you need to eliminate some of those people. Now, that's very painful, very difficult, and you always think you need more people than you really need. One of the most important lessons I ever learned was from businessmen and some successful ones who said, you have to stay skinny on your administrative staff. You have to stay skinny. That is, you do as much as you can with the least number of people possible. Watch your money. It's sort of fascinating. I just read a book about the West Wing at the White House. And it had to do with the first ladies in the, I guess, about 3/4 of the 20th century. And there was one man who lived through almost all that period and worked at the White House. And what was fascinating to me is how most of the wives of presidents were very frugal with money. I mean, you would have been surprised. For example, Eleanor Roosevelt, she would ride the bus. She would look at the newspapers and find out what groceries were on sale and have the staff buy the groceries on sale. Mamie Eisenhower, the wife of the famous general, she did the same thing. They were all very concerned to watch their money and not spend anything they didn't have to spend. Now, in recent years, we've had people who've been less careful. And it's reflecting as a nation in a debt that's somewhat problematic at the moment. But again, it's the kind of thing you have to think about. And if you don't start looking at little things, you don't get the bigger things. So you may think you can't trim anything. You can trim. If you have to, you can always trim. I know of another school, they were running into some budgetary problems and someone came in to advise them. They had to cut 17 people. They were not a big school, about 500. Cut 17 people, and they thought, it's the end of the world. After a year, they were fine. They were all doing the same thing with 17 less people, and nobody was overburdened. Are your expenses aligned with your income is really the basic question. You have to find a way to make that work. And one of the smartest things any of us can do is say, we have to balance our annual budget. If anything, we need to try to save a little extra money because there are always times economically, no matter where you are in the world, there are always times economically that add more stress. And then if you have a little extra, you can manage. It's like Joseph with the 7 fat cows and the 7 lean cows, right? So I worked for a school that had a policy of no endowment. And so they said, this is a mission. We trust the Lord to bring the money. If he doesn't bring the money, then we'll have to deal with that. And we had a couple of bad years and they had to do some things. And I suggested, I said, why don't you think of it like the dream Joseph interpreted of the 7 fat and lean cows? God may give us good years, and we need to put some money aside. And then when we have the fat years, when we have the lean years, then we've got a little to be able to balance everything. So you think about it that way. The other side is to ask yourself, are contributions and other sources of income at the expected level? If they're down or declining or not what they really ought to be, you can ask yourself, why? Why do you think that's the case? And what can be done to increase income? Review best practices. What do other schools or other organizations do that are similar to yours? And, I might add a thing or two in here that would be helpful. For example, typically a Christian organization is thinking about money for annual needs. And you're not thinking about big gifts for the future. It's for right now, what we need right now. Some years ago in the States, major institutions began to think about what they call planned giving. Some of you familiar with planned giving? And that was working with people who had considerable assets to help them think about what they would do with their money when they died, so that the things that were most important to them would be benefited. And for Christian people, one of the most important things would be to advance God's work through bequests at your death. As a matter of fact, some of the biggest gifts an organization will ever receive is often through a planned gift or a bequest. So our organization became the first theological school in the United States to hire a person to do nothing but plan giving. That meant no immediate money coming. We were just paying him for the future, not the present. But in years to come, millions of dollars began to arrive because of his work. Now, we had to pay the money now, believing that God would use it in the future to benefit our school significantly. And that's the kind of thing you think about. Then leadership. Could there be a leadership issue? And if so, how do you see that? And I would be asking, is a leader giving good direction so that everybody knows what you're trying to accomplish and what it will take to get it accomplished? And is he energizing, supporting, encouraging the staff and those who give money to the school? Is there clear vision and a compelling reason for that organization and its support? And are the reports to those who are supporters clear and inspiring? And that's part of what you have to think about as well. One of the things that I learned during my work was most institutions were giving information. It was sort of like a news report. And so you would say, this has been happening, this person's teaching here, and this is going on, so on. We began to ask ourselves a different set of questions, and that is, we said, well, what would really motivate a person to give? You think that if you tell them this is happening, that would do it, but often that isn't the case. They give to vision. They give to significance. They give because you give them ownership of something important God is doing. And so what we did is we completely changed. We went from hot to cool communication. So we started telling stories. Well, storytelling now is becoming somewhat acceptable again. But nobody was doing much of that. But we were just telling stories of what God was doing. And it changed everything dramatically. If we did advertising, we didn't advertise how good we were or what good professor was there. We talked about things that were important to God's people. And we had a whole different approach. And it's amazing. People start noticing that. It's different. And they want to identify with it. Sometimes you think you have to do it like everybody else does. And then you say, look, what's really important to these people? What will grip them by the heart? What's going to really get their attention and make a difference? And that's what you begin to do. And you expect the person who is the key leader, whether it's CEO, president, or whatever title, you expect that person to lead the way. Helping develop that kind of vision and communication and being the chief fundraiser for the school. You may have other people raising money, but the president has to be the person who's responsible to raise the biggest gifts. People expect that. And if you don't do it, you're not doing your job. Well, how about the board? There could be an issue with a board that's causing a problem. Wouldn't be unusual. First, you ask, do they agree with the mission and vision? Do they support the CEO? How much money do they contribute? If they're not giving much, then you ask, do they have the capacity? If they have the capacity and aren't giving, it's a message. What about time and expertise? Is there conflict on the board? Sometimes there is. And there can be a combination of issues that make it difficult to unravel the root cause. And you think you know and you don't. How can you tell? Sometimes you've got to look much more carefully at results and then the results behind the results. I'll give you another example. Our school grew enrollment significantly, and then we started tapering off. And it was like that. Well, there were people on the staff who said, we are not advertising enough. And we slowed in advertising. So they said, we need to spend more money on advertising. And there were a couple of other things that were, we need to do this or that. And so I was not sure any of that was right because I was watching other schools and advertising and everything. And I said, look, let's spend some money on market research. We'll spend the same amount of money on market research and we'll have an idea of where we are. Well, it took us a while to do the research, but when we got it, we were shocked. What we had been doing a few years earlier was perfect. What we were doing now in terms of the kinds of students we're trying to reach, some of the things we were saying were being perceived negatively, and we didn't even know it. So all of a sudden we had a wake-up call. We said, we thought we knew what we were doing. But times have changed, students' thinking has changed, and now we're going to have to make an adjustment. Well, ultimately, as you know, you take the SWOT analysis and you use that to develop a plan. You may call it a strategic plan or plan, but what you do is you address all the significant factors that surfaced in the analysis, and those become your basis to chart a new future for the organization, or a somewhat revised future for the organization. I have to tell you this, though, and please read that carefully. The failure rate of typical organizational change efforts is about 75%. And you probably know plenty of stories yourself. People thinking they were going to get all their problems solved, do it right, and so on, just cause more troubles. So the plan has to realistically address the criteria, and then it has to lead to a strategy that'll be regularly reviewed. And one of the things I see as very important in all of that is what I would call institutional culture. Because all the SWOT analysis in the world isn't going to help you if you don't use this information to develop a healthy institutional culture. That's the key to a durable turnaround and sustainability, if you want to make it work. If not, the institutional culture can actually hold you back. You may know things that need to be done, but it fights against you. Institutional culture, as you've gathered, is usually the primary reason for failure in a turnaround effort. Well, what is a healthy institutional culture like? What are some characteristics? Well, I would say a healthy institutional culture reduces uncertainty. I could even say it minimizes, it may not totally eliminate, but it should minimize fear. As you reduce uncertainty, people know what to expect. So you clarify your expectations. They know, here's what we're going to do, here's where we're going if we do this, this is how it should work, and so on. And then you create some continuity, and that builds confidence. You get a connective commitment, an identity, and you get a payoff. And that points you to your vision for the future. Now, how can you build this? Well, there are probably a lot of answers, and I'm not about to say what I'm telling you is the only answer, but I think these are very helpful suggestions. And one of those is give clear, regular communication so that no one is uninformed. I mean clear, regular communication. You cannot assume if you say something once or even twice, everybody gets it. They don't. People in the organization have to know what is expected of them and what they can expect of you and the rest of the organization. That's when you begin to get stability. You build strong relationships. That becomes the glue that holds the organization together. And you may have to do all kinds of informal things to build those relationships. person who is the leader may need to spend a lot of individual time with every key staff person to get to know them, to pray with them, to find out what's important, to help them, and to show they make a difference and they will get support if they need it. If I know you really care for me and you're going to help me if I got a problem, it changes everything in the organization. If I think you don't care or don't pay attention to me, it's another factor entirely. So you're looking for cohesiveness. That leads you to the development of trust. And I would say trust is foundational to a healthy institutional culture and moving forward. If I know I can trust you, I know you care, I know that what you say is what's going to happen, and if you've told me that's the way it's going to be, it'll make all the difference in the world. So the other thing you can do is clarify values, seek observable ways to measure alignment with practice. For example, this is how we do things around here. That's just plain and simple, but this is what's important to us, and this is the way we do things. Here's how we treat each other. Here's how we deal with our goals. Here's how we deal with donors, etc. I'm going to give you a sample statement that's used for the business group that I now work for. That's a C&L Financial Group, and it's very simple, but very helpful for people who work in the organization. Respect the dignity of every individual. Honor truth. Value our tradition to serve. Champion the long-term perspective. Develop people and foster teamwork. Encourage faithful stewardship. And then you always have a few other little asides that go with it. Like our chairman says, you protect the downside and the upside will take care of itself. But you look out for the downside or the problems, and then the good things will come. So